Welcome to episode 56 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. In this episode's main segment, I'm interviewing Jata Amata, who is a Nigerian writer and director. His film Black November, starring Kim Basinger and Mickey Rourke, was just released this past week. We talk about how he got this movie made, and he gives some great, nice advice to writers who are not from the U.S. So stay tuned for that. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread the word about the podcast. I'd like to thank over on YouTube, Stanford Crane and Layla Cummings, who left me a nice comment on episode 54. Layla asked about writers from outside of the USA breaking into television. I haven't done a lot of television writing myself. Episode 54 was all about breaking into TV within the U.S., so this was kind of an interesting question, but I don't really necessarily think I have a good answer for it. My understanding that the fellowships and contests that Tanya talked about in episode 54, my understanding is that those are also available to anyone in the world. So anyone can apply for them. If I'm wrong on this, please someone just send me an email and I'll make a correction in the next episode. Also, though, so the bottom line is I think you can listen to episode 54. No matter where you live in the world, you can probably apply to those same fellowships. And my guess is you still stand the same chance of winning as someone who lives in the USA. My guess is they don't really care where you live as long as you're willing to move and take advantage of things. You're going to have to move to Hollywood to be a television writer on a Hollywood TV show, obviously, because you need to physically be in that writer's room. But I think as long as you're willing to do that, I think those fellowships do offer some opportunity to everybody, including writers outside of the U.S. You might also, my guess is, you might also look locally. My guess is most countries have similar programs, so you might look at your whatever country you live in. I'm sure they have some local television that gets produced, and they might have a similar program. So just try and track that down. I can't imagine that the BBC doesn't have something like this. Also, in today's episode, I'm actually talking to a writer and director from Nigeria, and we actually discuss a little bit about how to break in from outside of the U.S. as well. So keep an ear out for that, because he is someone who has actually made some movies, and he's not from this country. So he has some real good insight in the main segment today. I want to thank everyone who has subscribed to my YouTube channel. I'm well over 550 subscribers now, so thank you, everyone. If you use YouTube a lot, please do consider subscribing to my channel. And on Twitter, thank you, Scriptreader Pro and Brandon Rhines, and all the other people who retweeted last week's episodes. That's very much appreciated. And on Facebook, thank you, Joaquim Abu-Chi and Brandon Rhines, who liked last week's episode. Again, I do try and answer any and all questions that I see come through Facebook. So if you have a question, feel free to post it on the Facebook page. You can find our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/sellingyourscreenplay. A couple of quick notes. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast, and then just look for episode number 56. Also, if you want my free guide, How to Sell Your Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address, and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide, how to write a professional logline and query letter, how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. It really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm talking with Nigerian filmmaker Jata Amata. Here is the interview. Welcome, Jata, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Ashley.
So to start out, I wonder if you can give us a quick overview of your career and kind of how you got started and, got to where you are today, writing and directing this feature film, Black November.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm what you call Nollywood, which is the Nigerian film industry, which, well, It was the name given by New York Times to us. It's out of the three largest in the world. This is Hollywood, Bollywood, we come in there. So my family here, my grandfather featured and co-wrote in Africa's first colored feature-length film, and did a few films after that. From 1956, was one of the first Africans to be in Hollywood to try doing some work. And my father took after my grandfather as a producer, director, and actor, very famous in Nigeria. So I found myself edging into the same industry. So at the age of about 14, 14 to about 16, I was doing a teenage show on TV where I was just presenting, and later started directing. Then I went off to the university, studied theater arts. And when I finished theater arts, I came out and directed my first movie at the age of 20, which got released at 21. And
okay. And what was the name of that movie?
It's called Black Gold. It's called Glamour Boys, my first film.
Okay, perfect.
And
So
I just kept moving on from there, and it kept getting bigger and better. I was young, and all I wanted to do was experiment. So I did a science fiction film at the age of 25. It didn't sell a copy in Nigeria because no one could identify with it, because it was like, what the heck is this guy doing? I did different kinds of historical pieces. I experimented. I did crazy things. I lost a lot of money, but I just kept going because I wanted to break some boundaries at that time. I always used disruption as a way of reaching out to people, and it just kept on going. And then I found myself in the West. My first visa out of Nigeria was to go for a film festival, and that's how it started. And I started traveling around the world, talking about films and making films in different places.
Sure. Okay, so let's dig into your most recent film, Black November, and kind of talk about that. Maybe you can give us a quick, just a log line or a sentence or two, sort of, so people who haven't seen the movie yet will kind of understand what it's about. You can just maybe pitch it to us right now.
Okay, well, Black November is a story about Nigeria being an oil-rich nation, the fifth largest exporter of oil in the world. And the people in Nigeria who produce the oil are just about a fraction of the population of Nigeria, and yet we're the most underdeveloped part of Nigeria because of all the corruption from the oil companies, from governments, from the tribal leaders, and from the youth. So it's our land is disappearing from us, and if something doesn't happen, we would lose it. So Black November tells a story of where we have been and where we are right now, and possibly where we can go to.
Sure. And where did this sort of seed of an idea come from? Were there some real events that you read about or witnessed that kind of gave you the inspiration for this?
Yes. Almost everything in Black November is inspired by true events. So what I did was to weave them into a story that can be told.
The one thing, watching the movie as someone, and I apologize, I'm probably like a lot of Americans, I'm kind of ignorant on things that are outside of the United States, and especially in a country in Africa. And so when I was watching this, I actually was wondering, gee, is this based on a real story? The one thing that sort of struck me was you had some scenes that took place in the United States, and then once those scenes took place, I kind of felt like, well, gee, I would have heard of this if some Nigerian terrorists had taken hostage in this country, and so it seemed a little bit more fictionalized. Where was that line drawn between fiction and what actually has happened?
The United States. You just said it. That is when fiction. That is because the reason I had to do that was to get your attention, to get the attention of the Americans. So that is why that part was created. Because up until a few months ago, 1 out of every 5 Americans used Nigerian oil in their cars, Nigerian gas. With 20% of our oil, of the oil used in the United States, was coming from Nigeria, and it has been happening for so many years. But Americans didn't know that.
Yeah,
it was important to make them understand that if we just do this film, make it about us, the world wouldn't understand it as much. Americans wouldn't feel like there's so much for them to do or understand in it. But when you make them know that this concerns you too. You have Chevron, you have Mobil, all the biggest oil companies, American-based, and our oil comes here. So that part of the story, which is a fictionalized one, was what I created to bridge the gap. But now some of the lines spoken by the American executives were real lines that were taken in different situations by them. In different situations, real life situations that happened in different parts of Nigeria, where lines are used for the oil executives. So the fictionalized part is America. Let's put it that way. Is what happened in America.
Yeah. So let's talk about sort of some of the logistics and sort of technical aspects of a film like this. How do you go about getting something like this financed? I'm curious, like, what kind of a market exists? I mean, all these things that you're just saying, like, well, Americans don't really appreciate, how much of their oil comes from Nigeria. It seems like those things would be roadblocks to getting a movie. Obviously, making a movie like this brings attention to it, but, a lot of Americans are maybe not going to be interested in seeing a film like this simply because they aren't aware how much Nigeria impacts us.
Yeah, financing for film generally is always a huge, it's always a huge hurdle. But I did it the Nigerian way. When you want to make a film in Nigeria, you look around you. First of all, you put a little of your money on the table, look around you at your friends and family and contact to see who can support it. That is what has made Nollywood what it is today. So that's exactly what I did. No financing came from the United States. Everything came from Nigeria. Everything came from Nigeria, from people who, from a couple of people who saw that there was that it was time for this story to be told to the world. But rather than do it the Nollywood way, make it low budget, like Nollywood, I mean really low budget, like $20,000-$30,000. They were like, let's make it slightly more robust. So financing of Nigerian films is not as difficult as financing in the U.S. because we spend a lot less money. This is the first time we're doing something this big. So if this works out, I will guarantee you that there'd be 10 of this by next year.
Yeah.
Because we do self-financing. We don't go to banks to finance. We don't finance with tax breaks and all that. No, we finance by ourselves and look for a couple of branding opportunities to put in the film and raise the money for the film.
Yeah, and I mean, you had some pretty big stars. Mickey Rourke and Kim Basinger are in this film, so that's obviously requires some sort of a budget just to get those types of actors involved.
Yeah.
So,
obviously, yeah. Go ahead.
And so that was kind of my next question. Okay, so I think I have a good understanding of how you kind of got this financed. At what point do you start to get distribution lined up? Did you take this to film festivals? Did you approach a distributor before that or during that time?
Okay, I'd say the way we planned to do it at first, we planned to just go to a few festivals and do our own grassroots marketing and distribute it ourselves. But along the line, we realized that we needed the power of companies like E1 to support us to do it. We can't do everything ourselves the way we do it in Nigeria. We make a film, we distribute it ourselves and all that. So, but we did a few festivals, no doubt. We did a few festivals as we're doing it. But one important thing about the film was each step we went, we kept tweaking one thing or the other. We kept making this better. That okay, let's tailor this more to the Western audience so they can understand this more. So it kept going like that. But yes, we got approached by a lot of distributors. I'll tell you that a lot of distributors wrote us, "Oh, we heard about this film from this festival or from the screening you did, because we did a screening at the United Nations. We did a screening at the Kennedy Center that was attended by congressmen and senators. There was a resolution passed on the House in Congress because of this film. So that gave us some kind of an edge on publicity. So a few people reached out to us, and then we looked at the best one the best company that could tailor our efforts into the right direction, and then we went with them.
Yeah. Okay. I'm curious, kind of how you balance like the business end of things. Obviously, as a writer and director, you've got to be conscious of some of these business, things that come up in filmmaking, but balance those with, being an artist. I mean, you mentioned, in your younger days, you did a wildly out there sci-fi type of a film. It's, as I said, I applaud you for being, a true artist. But I worry sometimes that these types of films may not find a solid market. So what kind of advice can you give us? How do you balance the business end of things with, the fact that you are an artist and want to bring light to certain types of stories that may not be marketable?
Okay. Now, first of all, right, when you grow up in a place like Nigeria, you get to grow up being able to do everything. You get to farm. You get to cook. You get to go to school. You get to sell something for your parents. You have to, in every aspect of our lives, there has to be the survival instinct. So that is what we all have, and that is what has brought me here. Now, balancing these two, as the years have been coming, I've been leaning less towards the business part and concentrating more on the creative. And that's why you always need the right people around you, so that while they take care of the business, you can take care of the creative. So, but there's still a part of the business in me, because that is just who we are. Because you can't survive in Nigeria without trying to mix your talent in with your survival instinct. How do I survive from this? How do I do this to put food on my table? So, but I would say maybe like 50% of that drive in me has gone down, because there are other people to help me with it. But it's still there somewhere. But what I will not do is compromise. Like I told you, I made a sci-fi film when I was a kid, and I didn't compromise. I wanted to tell people that the speed of light was 186,000 miles per second. I didn't compromise because I felt like, oh yes, it needs to sell. I just went there, and I burned my fingers a lot, and I kept burning them, but people started taking some notice of this guy who keeps burning his fingers, and let's look at him more. And it started working out. But then I was a lot younger, so it was easy to take those risks.
Yeah. So one of the things I get, as I said, my blog is literally at sellingyourscreenplay.com, and I get a lot of people from third world countries emailing me and, asking me, hey, how can I break in? And I'd be really curious to hear your take on that as someone who's from Africa. The advice I always give people, and you can tell me if I'm just completely off here. One of the things I think, and a lot of people that email me, I can tell that their English is definitely a second language, and I think submitting a script to Hollywood, I think that's going to be a huge hindrance, submitting a screenplay that is not written in perfect English. So my advice to people is always to get involved in your local film community. Every country, it may not be as big as Hollywood, but every country has some film community, and try and get involved in that. And, work your way up from that, because the language issue is not going to be a problem, obviously, if you're interacting with other people that speak the same language as you. What advice would you give people who are, they're in a third world country, they don't have a lot of resources? What can they do to make their dreams a reality?
First of all, I mentioned this, like Nigeria, we have over 500 recognized languages. So we converse in English. So a lot of these third world countries, the first language actually is English, and their local dialect becomes the second language. People, let's say from Nigeria, who write scripts that are not worded properly, do that because they are not good writers, not because they cannot communicate well in the language. The first thing I would say to people out there, third world countries, and I would like to use a case study with African countries where English is about the first language, is find an authentic story that hasn't been told already, that you have, and write about it. If your script is not so good, but the concept and idea behind it is good, there will be someone out there who would be interested in it. That is a take. And in trying to tell your own story, wherever you are, there has to be a mix of the Western element. A lot of people disagree with this, but I tell you categorically that the West is so proud. The West is so proud, almost to a position of being pompous, that the West wants to see and identify with a bit of themselves. So if you want to tell your authentic story, look at the way in which it affects the West, or a way in which it can interest the West, and put it out there. Even if it's not the most amazing screenplay, the moment the concept and the idea is identified, you will get help from the people who know how to tailor stories like that.
And you're suggesting that they bring in the West because really sort of for the practical business decisions is that ultimately that's where the audience is, and so you want to have something that those Westerners can relate to. Is that sort of the idea behind why you're suggesting bringing the West into the story?
That would be the first idea, because what is the use of telling a story when it can't be told to a lot of people? If you have an opportunity to tell it to 1 million people, strive hard to do that rather than telling it to 10. And then the second thing is that the reason third world countries are third world countries is because there has been a huge influence from the West. So there's hardly any major story we want to tell that will not include the West, either in a positive way or in a negative way.
Yeah. And so let's break this down just a little bit further into real sort of some concrete chunks. So I totally get that. Write an authentic story. I think that's great advice. But once you've written that script, what exactly should you do with it? Who do you send it to? How do you, like you're saying, there'll be some people that, can help them sort of clean it up a little bit. How do you find those people? If you're in one of these third world countries, how can you actually get to those people that can help you take the script to the next level?
Okay. Now there's a saying in the world, well, for my people, and I think it's quite vast. Charity begins at home, which is what you said. The advice you give them is, first of all, look at your local industry. You have to attain some strength and knowledge in your local industry before anyone in the West can take you seriously. You can't just write the most amazing story, reach out to people out there. It most likely will not even get to the people out there. So first, you have to look within yourself, within your market, and try and make a mark, no matter how tiny that mark is. Now, after making the mark in your own geographical location, then you can begin to look at telling wider stories. I was in Nollywood for I did film in Nollywood for good, 15 years before it was possible for me to look at getting into the United States. Even before the United States, I had done film festivals in Germany, in the UK, in fact, all over Europe, in the Netherlands, in Ireland, in Italy. I'd done things all over those places. I felt I was reaching out to people, but the United States was the last place that I had to come to. So you need to learn how to crawl to walk, and I think people in the third world countries have to be told exactly how it is. Things should not be sugar-coated. If you want to get to this point, you have to start from here, and then you have to keep moving till you get there. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah. And so just to be absolutely clear, you're suggesting to start out, just find a local production company and take the lowest job that they have, the production assistant job. Just get in the industry so that you start to make some contacts. That's kind of the gist of what you're recommending, correct?
Absolutely. And all the people in Africa who have made it out here started like that. Though I had my grandfather was started the movie industry in Africa. My father was a very famous actor-director. I started as a runner. I started as a PA before I got the opportunity. So I climbed all the ladders. And it's a third world country, so you have to learn everything. You have to learn the workings of a camera. I did that. You have to learn all kinds of post-production, from the analog to digital. You know, I remember when I put on my first computer. I remember when I downloaded the first, or when I installed the first software to use for editing. So you have to learn these things. You have to do these things. You have to be local and be steadfast in being local before you can be international. And that's why I think the advice you give them is very apt. It is as it is. You have to start from around you, look for the people around you to start before you can think of writing an email to ScreenMag to say, hey, I've got this and I want to do, and how can I just make this work? It doesn't just happen like that. There's a lot we hear about the American dream, but it's there, but it's not as easy as it is. There's one person out of a billion people that can catch the American dream from Africa.
Yeah, sure. So let's talk about just briefly, what's your next project? What are you working on now, and what will we see from you in the future?
Well, I'm working on a film with the Haitian government called Toussaint, which is a story of how there was a slave rebellion that led to the Declaration of Independence by the slaves to form the government of Haiti, which happened in 1804. So we did some strong research since last year up until now and came out with a script, and then we're looking at the possibility of filming that. So it's called Toussaint, and that's definitely the next project.
Perfect. That sounds like a fascinating story. So how can people see Black November? Do you know when it's going to be released in the United States, or I guess even across the world? What's the best way? Is it going to get some theatrical run in the U.S.? Is it going to be available video on demand? Maybe you can just talk a little bit about that so people can find it.
Okay, so we're doing a limited theatrical, and it's day and date. So on the same day we come out on VOD in almost all the platforms. So
okay.
This happens from the 9th, which is a few days from now, 9th of January 2015, which is
Perfect.
a few days from now. So so you can either go on iTunes and get it there, or video on demand, or in New York and LA in some very limited theaters. You can you can also see it. Then depends on how it goes, it grows.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and I'll link to the trailer. I'll put the trailer so people can find that and just get a feel for the film as well. What's the best way for people to keep up with you and kind of follow along with what you're doing? You know, if you have a Twitter handle, you can mention that. If you're on Facebook, a blog, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, if people just want to kind of learn more about you and what you're up to.
Okay, so it's always my name. On Facebook, it's Jata Amata. And a lot of people spell the Jata with double T. It's not a car, it's just one T. So it's JETA on Facebook, and on Twitter it's the same at jataamata.com. Instagram the same, Jata_Amata. And I have a website for my production company, which is JataAmataConcepts.com.
Perfect. And as I said, I will link to all that in the show notes so people can just find the show notes and then click directly over to it. Well, Jata, you've been very generous with your time. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking with me today.
Well, thank you very much, Ashley. I really appreciate this too.
Just a quick plug for my email and fax blast query service. Just in the last 18 months, I've optioned 8 scripts, sold 1 script, and got 1 decent paid writing assignment. And all of this came through using my own email and fax blast query service. Here's how it works. First, you join SYS Select. Then you post your login and query letter in the SYS Select forum. I review your login and query letter and help you make them as good as they can possibly be. Then you purchase the blast and I send it out for you. The emails are sent as if they're from your email address, so all replies go directly back to you. You can exclude companies if there are specific companies you don't want to send to. Check out www.sellingyourscreenplayselect.com to learn more. To wrap things up, I just want to touch on a few things from today's interview with Jata. As I mentioned in the interview, I get a lot of people from outside of the USA who are trying to break in, and I really feel for these folks because there's no question it's much harder to break in from outside of the United States. And I'd really like to just hammer this point home. If you live in the USA, really anywhere in the US, you have a huge leg up. The closer you are to Hollywood, the better off you are. But trust me, just being a native speaker puts you worlds ahead of a lot of folks who I get emails from. It sounds like Jata basically agrees with my answer, which is to find local opportunities and try to work your way up locally. I mean, this is my advice for people who live outside of Hollywood. Even if you live in the U.S., I think there's local opportunities that can actually help you advance your career. And certainly if you're outside of the U.S., there's also going to be local opportunities. These local opportunities, they may not seem all that glamorous, and they may not even be very easy to get. You may have to struggle and work hard just to get a low-level job on a low-level production. That's fine, but trust me, no matter how hard it is, they're going to be easier to get than emailing scripts halfway around the world and hoping to sell it to a Hollywood studio. No matter how small these productions are, this really is how you begin to slowly build a screenwriting career. Anyway, I'll link to the blog post I referenced in the podcast. So if you want to read a whole blog post on exactly what I recommend to people who live outside of the USA, look for that in the show notes. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening.